Another official selection.
Welcome to Armor of Truth Flight number 440. As you can see, again, we have Matthew Littlefield here with us today. Folks, today, let me brief you, ladies and gentlemen, here about what we're going to be talking about, because this is going to be very important. How you save America from free trade. What is free trade? Matthew Littlefield has written a book that we've talked about here a few times, and we're going to promote it to death again tonight because we think it's certainly worth your time, Like a Roaring Lion. And the subtitle, How the Evil One, that would be the devil, works to destroy you. And this chapter 8 is, how does the devil work to destroy through free trade? Do you know what free trade is? Are you aware of the term? It sounds like the right idea. And under perfect circumstances, I guess maybe it would be. But we have fallen hearts, and we love to dominate. We love to have absolute power. So there's a problem. There's a system that's been at work in the world for centuries. And it is that particular free trade system. How does it dominate? How has a particular system in the world worked to dominate America from its founding right up to this day? We've told you here many times that America's worst enemy certainly isn't Israel, but we do have one, or a little conglomerate of enemies that would like to bring us down to establish this global order. So how is free trade unbiblical? That's what we're going to talk about tonight, and how we're going to make the argument and talk to Matthew back and forth about how we believe that is exactly what the Trump administration is doing. So let me bring Matthew on the screen, and I'll give you a brief introduction here. So Pastor Matthew Littlefield, pastor of New Beast Baptist in Queensland, Australia. I've been pastor there for 9 years. Are we at 10 yet? I think you told me last time.
10 will be January next year.
Okay, so January of next year. Write that down so I don't forget that.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. I've been in vocational ministry for 14 years altogether, with a Master of Arts in Theology with a focus in church history and the Early Enlightenment, which is that is huge. So there's just a brief background of what Matthew has studied and where his expertise is. Of course, pastor is what we find most compelling and important about his background. And 2 books so far, is that right? And Like a Roaring Lion and Defending Conscience is I think you might be working on another one. Is that right? It might be coming out.
I've got a couple of books in the works. So I've got a book on feminism and equality, which is just a collection of my articles from over the years, tidied up and put in a book. But also I've got a book on marriage, which I've been writing. I'm about 2/3 of the way through that. So I'm just working out which one of those I want to publish first. I've been just talking about that with my publisher. And there's other stuff in the works as well. I just love writing. So just keep an eye out for those. But we'll stagger the releases because Like a Roaring Lion only just got released soon. And my publisher's a small publisher, so it takes him time to get the work done. So there'll be others coming.
Excellent. Okay. That's good news. We need as many books from you as we can get, so we need to make sure you have time to write them. So I want to start in tonight. Now, the chapter starts out discussing communism, because I think sometimes people think we're arguing for some kind of socialism, and the core difference between Christian charity and the way we're called to live is coercion versus voluntary. And so we'll circle back around to communism, but I want to start off with a section from the book on page 119. Again, it's chapter 8 from Like a Roaring Lion. Let's see, before I do this, give us a background on this chapter before I dive into those specifics. Give us a background on why you thought it was important to write this chapter, how the devil destroys through free trade. Give us that background, and then we'll dive into some specifics.
Yeah, well, let me just address the communism capitalism thing at the start of
Right.
this. The
Sure.
reason I started with I started just briefly, and then we can come back to it in more detail.
All right.
The reason I introduced the chapter the way I do is I'm trying to encourage people. A lot of people just think it's free trade versus communism. That they think in binaries, and I'm trying to show people in the introduction that there is not just two positions on most issues. Like for example, there's not just two ways you can run an economy. There's multiple different ways. In fact, the terms capitalism and communism both come out of very recent history. They both really come from Adam Smith and Karl Marx. So sort of like the 18th, 19th century, got those competing ideas. But economies have existed back into the ancient world, and there are many different forms. So what I just want to do at the start is show, just because I'm critiquing what many people see as capitalism or what capitalism should be, does not mean I'm arguing for communism in any way. So I'll just say that at the start. We can come back to that in more detail. But the background of the chapter. So there's a few things which went into the background of the chapter. Firstly, from when I was very young Christian, I started to become really impressed with the way the Bible addresses certain economic issues. And many years ago, when I was just starting off as a youth pastor, I was running a Bible study, and we're looking at the book of Isaiah. And in Isaiah chapter 5, verse 8 to 10, around there, it talks about, woe to you who gather home to home until there's no room left in the land. And I remember reading that in my devotions and in my studies and thinking, hang on a sec, what's this talking about? So I explored what the Bible said, and the Bible was warning that if you let the rich gobble up all the land, nobody's going to be able to afford to live in the land. And I was like, wow. And now this is going back like a long time now. This would be back in 2010, 2011, where I was investigating this. And I started to realize, hang on a sec, if you look at the Australian economy and you look at a lot of Western economies, a big chunk of the economy is people stacking up homes as investment portfolios, and that's driving up house prices. So I started to really get interested in economics. I started reading economics works, and I was following an economist who's actually a Christian. And he mentioned a little bit, just in an offhand way, he mentioned something which I'd noticed as well, that if you look at Revelation chapter 18, and a lot of people avoid the book of Revelation because they see it as it's sort of like this impossible to understand text. And if you try to work out when it is going to happen and how it is going to happen, you'll get lots of disagreement. But the general teaching behind the text of what the text is actually saying is often a lot clearer. And what's very clear in Revelation 18 is that it's describing the fall of some kind of empire. Whether it's a global empire, whether it's ancient Rome, whether it's something else, it is describing what happens when an empire falls. And obviously I love history, right? So I've observed and read about the fall of many empires, and I realized, hang on a second, Revelation 18, and this is what this guy pointed out. He pointed out that if you look at Revelation 18, it kind of shows how a system which is very similar to our free trade system actually starts to fall apart. So those are like two of the links in the chain which led me to this chapter. Another link is a book which I highly recommend called 1177 BC, The Year Civilization Fell, by Klein. I can't remember his first name. I think it might be Eric Klein. I can't remember the first name of the author, but it's a fantastic book if you love history, because what the book shows is that the ancient world, just before the nation of Israel really came into its own. So this is in the period before King David came to rule. He was in like the 10th century BC. The ancient world was actually interconnected. It was an interconnected world. And in this ancient world, you had trade routes which spread across the entire region. So you would have a king in sort of what was called at the time Aegean Greece, or the Bronze Age Greek civilization, which is, you've got the Minoans on Crete, and I'm losing the name of that Greek civilization, but some call it the Aegean Greek civilization. You would find a king who is like part of this like little kingdom, and a kingdom there might be only a few thousand people, if that. He would have in his collection pottery that came all the way from what is today modern Iraq, but in the ancient world was the Mesopotamian civilizations of Sumer, Babylon, Arcadia, things like that. And so there's all this evidence to show that these civilizations were interconnected. And part of what connected these civilizations was this powerful empire called the Phoenician Empire. And I was just amazed reading this book. Some scholars have shown with quite good research that the Phoenician Empire even reached to southern Britain, and that's where Tarsus is, which is where, if you know your Bibles well, that's where Jonah was going to flee when he wanted to get away from God. He wanted to go to Tarshish. Some believe it's in Spain. Some believe it's in southern Britain because of the tin deposits there. Tarshish was famous for tin. But the point is, this world was interconnected by this Phoenician Empire. So in the background, I've got this interest in economics. I've got this interest in how the Bible reflects on economic problems that are going on in our society. I'm starting to follow economists, some who are Christians, some who are not. And this economist makes this mention of something that he observed just in an offhand way in Revelation 18. And at the time I was working on this sermon series working on a sermon series on the book of Hebrews. And that verse, the one who has power over death in Hebrews 2, verse 14, which is sort of the verse which frames that book, how the evil one works, that started off as a sermon series where I was just really interested. I was really interested in what ways does the devil seek to try and deceive us and destroy us? So I ended up preaching like a 7 or 8 week sermon series. And I actually, when I started that sermon series, I had no intention of getting into the free trade issue at the start, because I thought it's too esoteric. It's not something that most Christians will be interested in. Maybe it's just a little bit too complicated for people. But as I went through the series, and I spent a lot of time reading the book of Ezekiel and looking at the ways that it describes how the Phoenician Empire worked and the evils that led to, I realized, actually, this is really relevant to what we're seeing in the world today, with the way that Western nations are being corrupted, the way that people in my church are struggling to make a wage because they're competing with forces. And what's going on here in the modern world today is we're seeing the same kind of influences which are impacting the United States, Europe, Australia, and other countries, are exactly what was going on in the ancient world when God judged the Phoenician Empire because of the way it was working. And the Phoenician Empire was judged by God. I mean, many Christians have observed that. Many people know the city Carthage, which is a famous city. They might not realize that was a Canaanite city. They worshipped Baal there. That city was founded by the cities Tyre and Sidon, which are in the Bible.
Yeah.
And God judged the Canaanites through the Israelites in the land of Canaan, but he also judged them through the Greeks, he judged them through the Romans, he judged them through many peoples, and their empire basically disappeared. But
Matthew has frozen. I don't know if you can hear us, Matthew, but he might lose his connection.
It was powerful. Proto version.
There he is. He's back. Oh.
Can you still hear me? Were you able to hear me?
I think you're back in full now. So probably about the last 10 or 15 seconds is all we lost.
Oh, yeah. So what I was saying is I think we're going to talk about this today, but the Phoenician Empire, the Carthaginian Empire, was like a proto version of what the British Empire was in the 19th and the early 20th centuries. So basically, as I wrestled with this chapter, these chapters, Ezekiel 26, 27, 28, in the book of Ezekiel, and look at what God was saying, I realized actually money, trade, and economics is actually an important way, the important thing to understand, because it's a powerful way which the devil corrupts nations. And a lot of people, when they think of the devil, they think of how the devil is affecting them directly, tempting them directly, but they don't realize that he's also sort of like a grand master strategist who's pulling strings on a global scale, trying to harm entire nations. And so I just got to the point where I realized I actually have to address this. And those who've read the chapter will see, like, there's a lot of New Testament teaching which actually informs what the chapter's talking about, which actually is very applicable to the Christian today. So that's kind of a background of how I got to it.
That's excellent. And so let's start in then right here with where you're talking about this in the chapter. You mentioned Tyre and Sidon were a great trading superpower. They had colonies all over the Mediterranean and beyond, and their most famous colony was Carthage. The most famous general was Hannibal, whose name meant Lord of Thunder. The Greeks called them Phoenicians, and the Israelites called them Canaanites, which they were. Tyre and Sidon were the most prominent cities of the Canaanites in the eastern Mediterranean. Many Christians read about the Canaanites in the Bible and are familiar with the land of Canaan, but they tend to view this people as a reasonably obscure ancient people in and out of the way, in and out of the way part of the world. However, this is far from the case. The Canaanites, in many ways, were much more akin to the British Empire of their area, especially under the leadership of the Carthaginian city-state in North Africa. They were the most prominent people in the region, which consisted of the Greeks and the early Romans. So you mentioned off the air, and you touched on it there. How the Phoenician and the British Empire were similar. Now, if you don't mind talking through that a little bit, we've got a graphic that we're going to be sharing tonight, and thank you to Summer for getting that ready, because otherwise we wouldn't have it. And where we're going to compare, I should lay this foundation too. We're going to be talking about something called the American system. That is not the system that we're currently under, and it's not the system we've been under for at least the last 50 years and probably longer. So when we say American system, we're talking about what's referred to as the Hamiltonian American system, where a nation will be independent. And specifically the War for Independence, I wasn't taught this part of it, had to do with economic independence. I mean, that's kind of implied with Boston Tea Party, things like this. But we're talking about a system of nationhood that produces its own, it's a manufacturing nation. It's industrialized. And it's sovereign. And as Alexander Hamilton said, our primary free trade agreement is the Constitution. And what he meant by that was inside the United States, the states would be able to trade freely with one another, but when it comes to other nations, no, we have to balance the playing field here with tariffs. The founders were not originally okay with tariffs until the empire, the British Empire, began to do what they do. They never wanted us to become a nation. And once it became a nation, they worked hard to weaken it, particularly right up into the Civil War, or leading up into the Civil War. This process of free trade, where they enriched the southern plantation owners. Southern plantation owners would provide raw materials, cotton and tobacco, for example. And then the Brits were a manufacturing nation, so they would make the finished products and then sell them back to the colonies at whatever price they wanted. And when that dynamic occurs, the manufacturing nation will always be in a dominant position. Britain never, just from what I can understand, and if you have different information on this, let us know. That's what we're here to do anyway. They never really mentioned or pushed the concept or the term of free trade until they were a manufacturing nation. And at that time, Lincoln and the administration at that time, what we would call the North, from where we live in the South, wanted to become, they were working to keep and establish and keep this American system. They wanted to make us a manufacturing nation, to be independent. And so this ongoing battle, you see this in the letters of Henry C. Carey, an economic advisor to Lincoln, writing to the London Times, blasting them about this free trade concept because it was being used as a weapon. They never published. Yeah. They didn't publish any of his letters because they weren't at the time keen on hearing disagreements about their system because it was working very well for them. Many people say or assert that was one of the reasons for the start of the Civil War. Henry Carey writes in his collection of letters to the London Times, he says that wherever the empire goes, slavery walks hand in hand with it. And this is, as I mentioned, because what you're able to do when you're the dominant manufacturing or industrialized nation, you're able to flood a market with lots of products and drive prices and wages down to the point where I guess we just have to use people and not pay them, import people and not pay them. The last point I'll make before I let you describe this, and I'll put the graphic up, is this. In 1976 in the United States, it became, under Jimmy Carter, it became official U.S. policy, foreign policy, domestic policy, something called the Controlled Disintegration of the U.S. Economy. It was a document, actually 33 volumes of documents that the Council on Foreign Relations have been writing up since at least 1973. You can see how it relates to the, when you hear this, you'll see how it relates to the limits to growth, the Club of Rome's limits to growth paper and all that. So the idea was to deindustrialize the United States of America in favor of globalism or globalization at that point. So the free trade, imperial free trade system doesn't want borders. They don't want any regulations. And in 1982, we did this in a previous show, Billy Joel put out his song, Allentown, which starts off, they're closing all the factories down. It was about the Pennsylvania Lehigh Valley steel industry, which was one of the first ones hit by this policy. And they're closing the factories down. Everyone's standing in line. Our fathers and mothers had a different life. It seemed to be much easier for them. What changed? The promises have been broken. And as you get down to the end of another line is, the graduations hang on the wall, but they never really helped us at all. It was a different paradigm. It was a different situation in the United States at that point, and some of the art, some of the culture, you can see that coming out at that time. So the system that the Trump administration is trying to dismantle at the moment is that very system of free trade that has been dominating the world under globalization. One of the particular areas that you see this happening now. You explain Venezuela and Iran in this context. When you see it in this context, it starts to make more sense. Now, Iran may have had, it doesn't matter too much to me about what their nuclear situation was. The threat of it is a good enough reason for me, but more than that, if you remember what Trump said when he announced that the war had begun, he told the Iranian people, I'm doing this for the future. And as you said, you've read the National Security Strategy. When you read through there, you can see what he meant by that. It had to do with breaking down energy choke points around the world, like the Strait of Hormuz, where a particular group, we'll call them the globalists here, it's sort of the imperial free trade system. Remember, they don't like borders. They want to do what they always did, but it's not just Britain, of course, now. It's throughout Europe. So what Iran represents is the primary chess piece on the board for that, what I guess we could call the liberal international order, the rules-based international order. One of the primary chess pieces, because whenever there is an unstable Middle East, they have, through the Muslim Brotherhood and several other proxy organizations or military organizations, terrorist organizations, that they have worked hand in hand with. The Mark Curtis book, which I can't remember the title of right now, talks about this in depth. You don't even have to get through the introduction to see clearly what's going on. When they keep that region unstable, they're able to benefit wildly through the oil spot markets in the UK. So what it represents in the bigger picture is removing that chess piece from the board, which will allow these nations in that area to be sovereign and to have access to the world market in a more legitimate and fair way, not in free trade sense, but in a fair trade sense. When that comes down, if Trump is successful, let's put it that way, what that means So you see a lot of people today, Tucker Carlson and Joe Kent coming out recently. This is just like Bush. It's just like the global war on terror. I've seen this before. I don't want any part of it. But the administration has told them. They have put it out there already. And for some reason, they don't ever refer to the actual foreign policy strategy. If Trump is successful, right now we have about 400 military bases and assets in the region. If he's successful, that can almost immediately be cut in half. We won't need to have all that. Israel won't be so concerned with their neighbors. They want when I say this, I mean the government won't be able to use the idea that we're constantly being threatened as a bargaining chip. So the idea that Trump is controlled by Britain, Board of Peace kind of nullifies that. They don't want a free and independent Gaza. And this means that what we've had over the liberal international order for the past 15 years, particularly under both Bushes and Obama, will not exist anymore. And we'll have a more legitimate and fair system where the Persians in Iran today will have access to the market themselves. They'll be able to benefit. And the reason I say that is because that's exactly what just happened in Venezuela. Trump did not remove the regime. It's not the greatest, but he has exerted a kind of prestige, over them, power. Work with me on this, and we'll be able to do business. You'll be able to run your country, but here are some rules. Put your oil back on the world market so that your people can benefit from them and they're not starving anymore and they have an opportunity to lift themselves up. So there's a little foundation for what we believe is going on. And I think we have evidence for that. Now, what we love to hear from you is more about this similarity between the Phoenician system and the British imperial system and wherever else you'd like to take it. I probably won't give any more monologues like this. I want to hear more from you. But Summer's got some things to add. She wants to add here in a bit too. So take it away. What do you tell us about those systems and anything you would want to comment on about what I've just said here?
No, I really appreciate what you just said there. And a lot of the evidence that you're pointing to, I'm aware of a lot of it myself. In fact, I really found it fascinating in what you said there, is that you've traced back that deconstruction of the US economy to Jimmy Carter's administration, because I've actually done the same thing. If you go on my Substack, I don't know if you've ever read this article, but I did a series of articles, Has Standing with Israel Blessed America? The reason I did that is because a lot of people will just say, we have to stand with Israel no matter what, it blesses America. So I decided to do what I've never seen anybody actually do before on this topic, is actually look at the economic numbers of what's happened to the United States since they have tied themselves closer to America. And what's the other really significant thing which happened? Do you guys remember what was the other really significant thing which happened under the Jimmy Carter administration when it comes to the global economy? Do you guys remember? Put you on the spot a little bit now, but that was when the oil crisis happened.
The energy crisis. Yeah, over here in America, we used to get this little image would come up on our television screens at several points during the day. It would be a little light bulb reminding us not to use as much energy. People sat in lines at the gas stations a couple miles long, waiting hours to get an allotment of gas.
Yeah. We're facing that same sort of thing happening here in Australia soon. The government's already talking about that. But what happened at the time, I've put in the context in it, and in the context of that article series that I wrote, is the reason that the oil crisis happened in the United States, particularly, and in some other Western countries to a lesser degree, is because some of the oil countries were putting pressure on Israel because of their success in the 1967 war and some other wars. And basically America said, well, we're going to stand with Israel no matter what. But what Jimmy Carter did at the time is he started to enact a whole bunch of policies to move America away from fossil fuels. And even, remember, at the time, they put emission standards on cars, severely limiting the power of cars. Now, I've always been interested in this topic because I'm a muscle car guy. I love cars. Like, the early 1970s is like the peak of the coolest cars ever made. My favorite car, 1971 XY GT Ho, Phase 3 Falcon, Aussie Falcon was made. In that time, it had like 350 horsepower, which back in the 70s was a lot of power. It was just a powerful car, or maybe it had about 320. Anyway, we're not in here to talk about cars. My point is,
good if you like.
my point is they limited the emission standards on cars, but also he passed a whole bunch of policies which is actually part of what moved this on this trajectory towards this green push that we have today. He's sort of like the linchpin of that, and it's tied towards America's relationship with Israel and other Middle Eastern countries, right? So I just found it fascinating that you've traced it back to Jimmy Carter as well, because I've seen that from a different avenue of research. And you're absolutely right. I mean, Trump was actually doing a lot of good things on these policies. He'd gotten out of the climate accords. He'd gotten out of a lot of WF. He'd gotten out of the World Health Fund,
World Health Organization,
and the World Population Fund, which was depopulation. UNESCO.
Yeah, he was basically bringing America's sovereignty back on a lot of these issues. So I've observed that as well, and it was actually really exciting to see a lot of that stuff. Let's just move to the broader question you asked at the moment, though, because you want to talk about the similarities between the Phoenician and the British Empire. So the similarities, you can explain this in a different ways, but there's two main points that I want to make. Firstly, a lot of people have been trained by neoclassical economists or an economic theory to see trade as the opposite of war. And in fact, the British Empire in the late 19th century, so 1800s, early 20th century, worked really hard to interlock a lot of the European powers. And there were also other powers involved. You've got the French, you've got the Germans and others. And the theory was, if we can get these economies interlocked, then that will prevent war. Now, what actually happened? We had the two biggest wars in the history of the world. And those wars, people were going to debate about what caused those, who really started those wars. But if you look at them in the context of empire, what they were really about is that the dominant empire of the day, the nation which ruled the seas, did not want the land power of Germany on the European continent to get too powerful. It was fine to work with France. It wanted to keep Germany number 3. And so basically, Britain's involvement in those wars to keep its trade powers dominant is what turned those wars into regional European wars into world wars. And what proves that reading correct, I think, is if you look at the 19th century, you'll see that France and Germany went to war multiple times together. Sometimes France won, sometimes Germany won. But Britain stayed out of it after the early 1800s when they got involved with Napoleon. Like basically all of Europe got involved to stop Napoleon. Britain stayed out of it for quite some time and just focused on their trade networks. But then when they wanted to defend those trade networks, it led to two of the largest wars in the world. And that is because the dichotomy of distinguishing trade from war is a false dichotomy. Trade is actually, and it's particularly free trade, or trade dominance is actually a very important hand in the, not hand, what do you call it? I'm looking for a particular word here. You guys won't know what it is because you can't get into my mind right now, but range of options, that's what I'm looking for. It's a very important option for a government to use to crush other nations. So trade is not just a neutral thing. People think of trade as a neutral thing. War is an aggressive thing. No. Trade is often very aggressive. And the ancient Phoenician Empire knew this as well. And so I actually mentioned this very briefly because it was relevant to my sermon on Sunday, about how the ancient Carthaginians, one of the things which made them powerful is that they controlled the oil trade of their ancient era. In their ancient era, the oil trade was olive oil. And olive oil was sort of like one of the lifebloods of the Mediterranean economic system. People used oil in their lamps. I preached on the parable of the 10 virgins. So you got the virgins with their lamps. Some have extra oil, some have no extra oil. The wise ones had it, the foolish ones didn't. And I basically showed how what Jesus is saying here in this parable is if you don't have enough oil for the journey, you're going to run out. the equivalent today is fuel for cars, right? So that's why I brought it up in the context of the sermon. But in the context of our discussion, it's important to understand that Carthage used that monopoly on oil to dominate powers like Rome, powers like Greece, powers like their competitive Phoenician empires in Canaan, which they kind of separated from. And they would use those economic levers to get other powers to do what they want. Now, you can do that with force of arms, but you can also do it with economic interests. So the British Empire did that sort of thing often. But there's one key difference that I would like to bring up here, which I don't get into. I don't know if I explained this super well in the chapter. I actually haven't read the chapter myself. I wrote it a few years ago, so I haven't read it recently, but I can't remember if I mentioned this in the chapter. But you've got to think of the imperial system, the empire behind Carthage, is not just similar to the empire behind Britain. It is, as Philip K. Dick. You guys know who Philip K. Dick is?
Yeah. Familiar with him.
Yeah, he's a science fiction author. For those listening who don't know who that is, he wrote Do Electric Sheep Dream or something like that, which turned into the movie Blade Runner. He was a famous science fiction author. So he referred to this empire as the empire that never ended. And one of the things I'm arguing in the book is this kind of imperial dominating system is actually the devil and his spiritual forces at work. And what it does is it overcomes nations, subsumes nations, hollows them out from the inside, and then it moves on to a new host. So the Carthaginian Empire was destroyed by the Romans, who basically copied the military and navy tactics of the Carthaginians, did it with such superiority they were able to crush them. But part of the reason why the Romans did that is so they could take control of that olive oil trade. So they crushed a competitive nation to take control of their oil trade. That's that similar thing happening, right?
Yeah,
so what this did is that then those spiritual forces which corrupted the Carthaginian Empire actually corrupted the Roman Empire. And this is not just my opinion. Ancient Romans wrote about this. In fact, it was either the general who destroyed Carthage or the son of that general. He wrote in some of his writings at the time that our success is going to be our doom because we are now becoming corrupted by our prosperity and becoming like the nation which we destroyed. And the reason I've read that writing is because Augustine, the ancient Christian theologian, actually brings it up in The City of God, which is a book I'm reading at the moment, and shows he's arguing with the Romans. Look, you guys were corrupted and were starting to fall apart long before Christianity came, and Christianity is actually improving your society. So basically, this philosophy of empire, of dominating other nations and redirecting their trade for your own good, is sort of like an imperial force that every dominant nation is tempted to fall into. And something which you brought up in your talk just before, where you were describing the difference between the Hamiltonian system, the American system, and what it has become, is it's very clear that that wicked imperial spirit actually very much took over the American nation. I also agree with you that's not American. That is not the American way. And if you read American history, you'll see it's not the American way. But also, I agree with you that Trump was doing things to undermine that. In fact, I was talking about this with a friend the other day. And when Trump took Venezuela, when he took the Maduro and put him in jail, I said, I actually see that as immoral. I see it as immoral to take another leader like that, because no country has jurisdiction over another nation. But I also see it as smart from an economic perspective, because what Trump was doing is he was redirecting the major source of oil in the Western Hemisphere to benefit the Western Hemisphere, which would actually make both America and all the nations around it much more prosperous if that oil was being stewarded. So I kind of was giving ground to his perspective to basically see from an economic perspective and from a regional power perspective, I can see why a nation would do that. But when they went into Iran, I think that might have been the plan, but I kind of feel like they've run into a trap there. And I think Iran was set up as a trap. And I actually think you guys have written something about that, or maybe Promethean Action has said something about that Iran has specifically been set up as a trap to be a threat to the world economy. What do you guys think about that?
I think that the argument. Have you written about that specifically yet?
No, I don't perceive it as being a trap.
I have
I know that that's a popular, theme that goes across the internet right now.
It could go bad, but no question.
And it could last longer. And certainly, there are all kinds of factions and forces that have been radicalized that that they can use as sort of false flags, and people that have been ideologically subverted and activated, and so they can do all manner of things in that sense. I mean, that's certainly realistic that could happen and create a lot of situations to prolong the war. But overall, as far as our position is concerned, what we've been trying to say to people is, you guys are identifying this whole war based on like 2015 or 2003. Please,
Yeah.
please update yourselves with what the Trump administration is actually doing, because we don't even hear anybody speaking to that. Like it's like there's just this fog in front of them, and you don't hear anyone talking about or dealing with any of the things that the Trump administration is actually doing or saying. They're just falling right into this narrative of it's Iraq again, all over again, or all the forever wars that, to be fair, were done on behalf of the globalist network, if you will, which this administration is no longer under.
Which we identified in the CFR's writings, that influence, right? They were working for that liberal international order.
Right.
So
the degrowth.
I think you misunderstood what I meant by a trap there. I wasn't talking about that. I understand what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying there. What I meant is,
give us that perspective, and let's see what I might be able to respond to.
Yeah, it might have been one of the Promethean action videos I watched, so not from you guys. I thought maybe you shared the video, but in some of those videos, they've mentioned that basically the city of London has set up the nation of Iran as this kind of like overhanging threat over the world economy, that we can tank the world economy whenever we want. That's what I was meaning. And so Trump's gone in there, but I think
okay.
I think what Trump was expecting was what happened in Venezuela, but I think that this time it was a much more resilient competitor. That's what I was speaking to. So I was more meaning that the Promethean action, that sort of perspective, that he was going in there to kind of stop them from having that power of the global economy. That's what I was meaning.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we would say that what he did in Venezuela, what he's done a little bit in Mexico, what's probably going to take place with Cuba. It's kind of like we've been surrounded by communist forces all around in our own hemisphere, and there's things that we've had to do to position the United States into a better position, like what the Monroe Doctrine talked about doing. Again, that's something that if people were more widely aware of, they would understand some of the moves that we're making in the Western Hemisphere, and even our own population is not really understanding this. They're interpreting it through a lens of, technocracy and the technate and the North American Union and all of these kinds of things. But I would say that I do also, in my analysis, I do feel like Iran and what's gone on over there, I think it's a just war situation in the sense of we do have accountability for what the United States, the role that the United States played in the situation that Iran is in right now.
To go correct that,
I think that's just war. Cause.
Do you mean correcting what they did there with the toppling of the? Okay.
Yeah, the Shah and all of this, and the Ayatollah and the Muslim Brotherhood and all the ways that MI6 was involved in all of this. And so, we do. I think there is cause. There's enough evidence to say that there's ways that they can do this dark money flows and illicit capital flows and control of the oil, certainly, but also this religious warfare system that holds everybody hijacked too. And so that, that whole system and the Board of Peace cannot flourish, which everybody, shows very positive, like there's a lot of positivity coming out of that Board of Peace, the people that are on board in the Gulf region that want to see that region stabilize and move forward. So it would be peace through construction. So I do.
Emphasizing sovereignty as well.
Yeah, and emphasizing sovereignty. Like let's not not do this degrowth agenda that the CFR outlined, where everybody, goes into basically neo-feudalism. Let's actually build all of the, let nations have sovereignty under the American system of political economy. Let's go this way. And then you see people in the Gulf, different Arab nations coming together and investing literally trillions into the new American system, Trump's new plan. So
The big point there, though, continue, but I want to point out that the leader of the Board of Peace is Trump and will remain to be him,
Yes,
I guess,
right.
as
So
long as he wants.
Yeah, because he feels like, who else can I trust, to make sure it goes in the right way.
I think he believes in that concept of sovereignty. It's we're trying to think the best of him, because today I'm sure it's in social media that the opposite is the case. So
Right.
what to speak is Iran a trap? Now, of course, I would certainly expect that to be a play.
Yeah, I would think they're going to try to make it a trap.
Right, and they might do it
Yeah,
after the fact.
yeah.
I think, though,
Yeah,
that
so
there are
you-
two things that she mentioned: the Board of Peace. The
Peace through construction.
two big arguments against Trump and Iran today. They're saying the guy has no plan, and secondly, he doesn't know what he's doing.
Right.
Anybody who says that Trump doesn't know what he's doing, I don't know. Maybe they haven't been watching him for very long, but.
Well, that's part of the
The-
caricature that they make about him, is that he's bumbling and narcissistic and emotionally. Nobody knows what he's going
Okay,
to do
so
next.
I'll
That's
respond
part
to
of
that
a narrative. Yeah.
That particularly to answer what Matthew's saying here about the trap. I would expect it. I would expect that to happen. That's probably what we would expect to see out of them. But two things that argue against it. Number one, they have had control over these energy flow choke points over the world. The liberal and national order, particularly this, what we're calling this imperial system that still remains. And it's difficult to see if it was a trap. I'm afraid it might not work out the way they intended, because of what we mentioned earlier, that there won't be this instability in the region anymore. And secondly, and I think maybe more importantly, Trump has no plan. The Board of Peace has been established for a while, right? It was one of the first things he got started once he came into office. So when they say that,
Abraham
well,
Accords.
you don't have a plan for after Iran is over, this thing is going to descend into chaos because we can't afford to be there and keep it. Well, we won't need to be there to keep it up. That's what the Board of Peace is designed to do. That's another one of those things. The national security strategy and the Board of Peace is never mentioned by the critics at this moment.
Yeah.
So we put in a lot of faith in the Board of Peace. I grant you that. But we watched that first meeting from the Board of Peace, and the positions they put forward emphasize sovereignty. Like in Gaza, for example, they want to build an infrastructure. They want to set up an economy. And then in 10 years' time, they want to give this back to the people, the ones that left, come back, and let this be its own, I don't know, state. I don't know how they're going to deal with that, but it will be its own autonomous. It'll have its own economy. It'll be able to survive with a system set in place. Now, there have been there's some language in that the Global Peace put forward. They mentioned the term sustainable development. And a lot of people from the bloggers, what do we call it? How do we call them?
Alternative media space.
Alternative media, that's the best. I don't want to call them conspiracy theorists because, these are good points.
Independent media.
So they point to that, sustainable development. They don't define sustainable development. The UN doesn't own those words. The way the UN defines sustainable is, I guess I could be cynical and say to sustain us in our positions, but it really means manage to decline over time of
absolutely. That's exactly what they mean. I've written about that. By sustainable development, they mean depopulation, deindustrialization, and then
Orwellian.
Yeah,
and then the other one was
that is not even just an assumption. You can actually go and read that in their early documents where they use it and explain that's what they mean. They've written about this, so absolutely correct.
No doubt. I guess the last point there was on the Board of Peace what was I saying? Sustainable. Oh, the way the Board of Peace defines sustainable development is sustainable in the sense of sovereignty, to be able to sustain yourself, as being a competitor within the larger marketplace. So, I would expect it to be. I would expect them to try to set traps. As I told Alex Newman when we did an interview with him a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, Liberty Sentinel.
I said, those of us who are the base, the voting base, I believe that if we believed in it then, and we got him elected, I don't think we need to jump ship just yet. I think he's earned the benefit of the doubt, and for us to support him through this, even when we get nervous, So,
Right. And I would just add in that part of the strategy of the puppets of the globalist media syndicate. I always call them the globalist media syndicate because they often do things, they hand out their talking points, and across the media throughout the world, you can see how different themes and narratives are parroted. And one of their things that they really do is they capitalize on just fear. And so what they'll do is they'll just put out the scariest possible scenario, and they do that because they know that people are going to be they're going to respond to that emotionally. So that also is something that I'd like to just point out, is that the greatest threat that the United States faces right now, especially going into the midterms, is the psychological operations that are happening. So they're going to catastrophize every single thing that they can in order to create doubt and uncertainty and fatigue and apathy within the population.
It's absolutely correct.
Yeah. So that's something to be wary of, and it's something that the devil can use, to get people paralyzed or hopeless to the point where they don't come out and do the voting, and then the country is taken, and there we go. We go off into totalitarian land.
Something the devil can use. Summer is a master of the segue. So let's go back into the chapter and have you. What we'll do is, as we go through this, we'll kind of lay out the difference between the American system and the British system, particularly. I think I kind of did that already, but so Matthew and Summer now, because Summer has got a really good grasp on this chapter. She just came through it again today. Why don't you, Matthew, lead us into, from what we're talking about, and some of the most important points from your chapter, and particularly why is free trade, why is it not biblical? And take it wherever you'd like, though, because.
Yes, you did such a great job of hashing out from the Old Testament. Maybe start with some of the Old Testament.
Yeah, let's go back
where free trade is evil, as you stated, which you've clearly made your case in a very eloquent way, and then some of the New Testament instances. And I guess like page 200 maybe, or wherever.
Yeah, well, I mean, that imperial system, that free trade system, it's basically like a drug dealing system. It's designed to get you hooked on the supply so that you become dependent.
It has been a drug dealing system.
And it has literally used drugs. Exactly right. Yeah. Drugs are a part of it. In fact, it's not a coincidence that whoever the dominant power is for the last few centuries has also controlled the opium trade. So that I use that illustration deliberately because there's a double meaning there. But the actual free trade system itself is basically, it's very simple at the core. As a Christian, we believe in God, and we believe God knows what is best, and God created us to live within boundaries. God created all aspects of our life to live within good boundaries. So, for instance, the Bible is pro-sex, but it's within the boundary of marriage, and it's for love between a man and a wife, but also procreation. The Bible is pro-making money, but you need to consider the poor, and you need to not exploit the workers. So whatever aspect of life that you think of, the Bible gives us the clear boundaries within which God wants us to live within. And as Brad explained very, very eloquently before, free trade system does not believe in boundaries, does not believe in borders, it does not believe in sustaining populations. It is really a form of exploitation. And it's a form of exploitation which is sold as a form of freedom, which is exactly what the devil has always done. The devil is so good at this. He doesn't need any new tricks because the old tricks work. He sells you freedom when it is actually slavery. And what the Bible shows, if you look at the Old Testament system, for instance, a good example of this is in the Old Testament system, the people of Israel, you got the 12 tribes of Israel, 11 tribes were delegated their actual inheritance, and then the 12th tribe, the Levites, were not given their own inheritance. They were to share an aspect of all the other 11 inheritances. So those 11 tribes were to give the Levites land, places to live amongst them. They were to help supply them through their tithes. And the Levites were in a lot of ways the civil servants of ancient Israelite society. They performed a lot of civil but also religious functions. Now, within that system of the 12 tribes, they had their allotments of land, which they were given. And the Israelites didn't ever fully conquer the full borders of their land. They got pretty close. They got reasonably there. But the way it was to work is, so if you're in the tribe of Dan or you're in the tribe of Naphtali, you have your land, and your land is an inheritance which goes to the next generation. Now, you are not supposed to sell that inheritance in perpetuity. You could sell it, but that land was supposed to, at the year of Jubilee, revert back to the original family owners. And if there was no family alive, it would go to the nearest kin. We see an example of the nearest kin inheriting land and what comes with the land with Ruth in the book of Ruth. That's why there's that situation where Boaz has to talk to the other relative because he's actually closer to Naomi than he is. And the other relative's like, yeah, I'm okay to let it go. But because Boaz is the kin, that term, kinsman redeemer, that's what that's talking about. Mm-hmm. So the way this system was designed, it's actually a brilliant system when you think about it. And look, for people listening here, I'm not arguing that we have to bring back what the Old Testament says and apply all the Old Testament law to our lives. That's not my argument. I'm just reflecting on the wisdom of the Old Testament system and why God set it up. So the reason God set it up this way, right, is so that within a generation, say Brad and I lived in the same town, and I made some poor business decisions, and Brad sort of like, he lives down the road. He could buy my business and profit off that business for basically a whole generation. And then at the end of that generation, he would have to let it be sold to like my grandson or whatever, right? So that's the way the system is set up. You keep the wealth within the family, but you also allow a modicum of free trade within the network. So the network, you can trade freely. Like I can sell my cow to Brad. Brad can sell his goats to me or whatever, right? And there's no restrictions on that. But the land which he grows his herds on and the land which I grow my herds on, that is my family land. And at the end of each 50-year cycle, a 49-year cycle, you have the year of Jubilee, which resets everything back. These boundaries, what they did is they allowed people to build wealth, but what they did not allow and what they were supposed to stop was generational poverty. Now, what a free market system does is it entrenches generational poverty, because what it does is, in that same situation, I make bad business decisions, I sell my land, the person who owns it, it's theirs for as long as they want, in perpetuity. They don't have to give it back. What happens is then my kids and my grandkids, they are economically disadvantaged. Now, in the next generation, it might not be too bad. They can turn things around. However, if things don't turn around within a generation, what happens is you've got a situation where this group over here owns all the land, and this group over here, they're being born into a situation where they have no opportunity to buy the land. And that's how you get sort of like the equivalent of a feudal system, where you have a small landed aristocracy which owns everything, and everybody else is either a poor freeman who just wanders around looking for work, a journeyman as they called them in medieval Europe, or they're a peasant who is tied to the land, who has no opportunity to get it. But the system in the Old Testament was structured to stop this from happening. Another really good example in the Old Testament is tariffs. So Trump's tariffs policies were awesome. I think there's been some developments with the Supreme Court. You guys might know more about this, where they've undermined some of that. But his tariff policies were brilliant, because what tariffs do is tariffs allow you to invest into your own economy so you can make the stuff you need. And it puts a barrier on external forces coming into your economy and disrupting stuff. What free trade is designed to do. So in the Hebrew system, you are not, in the Old Testament, the Israelite system, and this is a beautiful system. And in fact, there were Christian civilizations which copied this in sort of the medieval and the early modern era, and it actually works very well, made Europe very prosperous. The way it works is, in ancient Israel, you could not charge interest when you lent money to someone who was part of Israel. So if you, in fact, not only could you not lend money to them, after a certain amount of years, you were encouraged to release that debt, or maybe you could let the person live in perpetuity as a servant in your house. But if you were lending to foreigners, or if a foreigner wanted to do business in your economy, they had to pay tariffs. If they were lent money, they had to pay interest. So that was an effective form of tariff, which was designed to protect the Israelite system from foreign interference. It did not mean they couldn't trade with foreigners. In fact, if you look at Solomon, he did a lot of trade with the Sidonians, the Phoenicians, and they helped to build the temple. Hiram, you remember Hiram, and I believe Solomon gave Hiram some villages, or the other way around. Basically, so the Bible didn't forbid trade, but it set up trade within the biblical system to benefit the local population, not foreign predatory investors. Whereas free trade basically makes the financial elites of the world, gives them the ability to use investment in a predatory way to undermine markets around the globe. And that is exactly what happened to the United States. The financial elites have hollowed out manufacturing. The same thing happened to my country. The same thing happened to Europe. It's happened in a lot of places. And then they use, what they do is, because they want no borders, is they want to move this money around the world wherever they can make the most at the particular time that they're making it. So that's just two examples, which I mentioned in the chapter, about how the system in the Bible was designed to protect people from free trade, but allowed people within the system themselves to trade with each other.
I want to talk about, I want to bring up Abraham and Lot for just a second, but when Summer and I were prepping for this today, we were discussing this, we got into a discussion about land use. And I'll just mention it right quick, and then maybe we'll, I don't want to take us, land use is important here, but I want to set you up and let you talk about this for a second, because this is fascinating to me. When we talk about these concepts of, as you mentioned, with generational wealth or inheritances, I remember as I was growing up in America, it was put into my mind early that you're supposed to go out, away from your family and set up your own life, wealth, and that sounds right. It feels right when I hear it, because I grew up in that paradigm, but the problem with that is atomization. As you just mentioned, the family becomes, atomized, and then you don't have strong families who have land and have wealth. And what that brought up for me was when I did a Genesis Bible study through with some guys from a church nearby here recently, and we talked about in Genesis 13 through 15, we're talking about Abram and Lot. They were constantly moving in search of fresh water and pasture. They arrived at Bethel, where Abram called on the name of the Lord, and he worshipped and prayed to the God who had been protecting and blessing him despite his own failures. This is right after Egypt, when he had his failure of faith there. But the God who had been protecting and blessing him. So, like you just laid a foundation for, there is a particular behavior and a way that we deal with our property and how we dispense it that brings blessing. Okay, so it goes on. But not even the hill country around Bethel was fertile enough to support the huge flocks. Abram and Lot had acquired areas in the Negev and the hills that were available to herdsmen only because they had too little water for settled farmers to want them. Abram and Lot soon found that if they stayed together, they couldn't avoid overgrazing the land and quarreling over limited water for their herds. So Abram, as the elder, could have chosen the best land for himself, which would have been the plain around the Jordan River, which was lush, a great place to have your herd. So, but Abram didn't do that. Abram gave Lot the choice. And the question that came up in the Bible says, why did Abram do that? And I guess, the answer that comes right out of the text is that he fully trusted God's promises to bless him when he was faithful. So he trusted in God, not his possessions. This gives us a fundamental orientation we should have to our land and any prosperity that we have, that this is ultimately not our home. We are in the world, and there's behavior, there are actions and an orientation we're expected to have while we're here. And this really speaks to that. So Lot made his choice. And Lot, of course, chose the lush land around the Jordan River, well-watered land. So what does this choice show about Lot? Lot had placed a higher value on the material, on the land, and his placed a higher value on his ability to sustain himself. Abram, on the other hand, desired something greater than the promised soil. He desired the eternal kingdom of God. So this is an example. I thought the application here for us today is that faith, trust, produces humility and generosity.
Yeah.
And of course, it brings blessing. That is the fundamental, that's what the American system was set up to allow for. When it was first set up, I don't think the concepts of eminent domain were quite, and even a concept like eminent domain could work out just fine as long as your leaders, your rulers, were righteous. But
Well, I wanted to build on what you just said right there. The book that Matthew's written, like a roaring lion, that chapter is so good because it really builds the case for showing the history. So not only have we in the 19th century and really for the last several hundred years we've been dealing with this empire that we've known for the last 300 or 400 years, but not only that, it was present in earlier times, like what we've been talking about, and how it really is it's like the Antichrist spirit. It's really the work of the devil. And so it's like a spirit that he can use throughout different civilizations, and it just manifests in slightly different ways. But, this idea that free trade was never just an economic model, it was a moral reordering of nations, a system.
Exactly. That's such a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's a moral reordering of nations and a system that taught countries to abandon stewardship, surrender sovereignty, and trust in the flow of goods instead of the provision of God, which is what you were just talking about, Brad, with that and all of your illustrations that you've made in your chapter. And it really is overwhelming. Like just when you get that 80,000 foot view, it's like you see it in the current of history, and it's like the Tower of Babel. They keep trying to build that ultimate power hub, centralized power hub. And so that's what really grounds it, that at the end of the day, what we're facing right now in the world, it's not like Democrat versus Republican. It's really like good versus evil. Are we going to live under God's design, under ordered liberty, under a moral reality rooted in God's principles, or are we going to go into this humanistic system that then wants to ultimately will only lead into madness and totalitarianism? So that's where it comes. So whether it shows up as the British Empire or when during the Biden administration, they were just as complicit. It's a battle between good and evil.
Yeah, and I would say that there's enough evidence to say that battle has been fought within the Republican Party itself. You can see it, and obviously it was, the Biden administration was just fully a servant of it. I mean, many other administrations have been, but it's this temptation. It's the devil's. It's a version of the temptation that you shall be as gods that the devil gave to Eve, and to think that we're the people who are actually going to be able to rule the world and benefit from this. But really, all the things which the empire does to make itself strong also undermines its ability to remain strong. And you look at the manufacturing power that America had in World War II. It's actually phenomenal. I didn't realize how powerful America was in that war until I read a book written by a Russian guy called The Chief Culprit, where he actually shows how much America gave to Russia to fight the Nazis. They gave America gave Russia more military equipment than the Germans were able to build themselves for the entire war. And don't forget, they also were supplying the United Kingdom, and they were also fighting Japan and out manufacturing Japan at the same time. So when you think about that power, but now you look at the manufacturing base, and like relative to Australia, you guys still have a decent manufacturing base to build from. So it's not fully gone. And if that can be rebuilt, and like you said, that reorientation of the economy, the problem is we live in a culture today which thinks of human beings as economic beings to serve the economy, where it's the opposite. The economy is supposed to serve the people. And when your economy, like what Brad was saying before, you were talking, Brad, about how you were just from a young age were taught, you raised in a culture where you just move away from home, build your own wealth, own structure, own family, do it all on your own. Like, and there's that sort of idea which became popular, I think, amongst the boomer generation. I don't think it was before that. And it was very popular in Gen X as well. That basically, when your kids turn 18, you kick them out of home and they got to do it alone. Like I was raised with that. Like I was raised with that idea. And I just felt like 18 was just cut off. But at 18, you might have finished your education. You might have a trade. I would recommend getting a trade and then go to university if you want to after that. But you're still starting off life. And the Bible says a righteous man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. It's not just about raising people and kicking them out. Your job is done. Families are to work together. And I know this part might be a little bit controversial, but a lot of people look at the Jewish people, right? And they're like, well, why do they have so much wealth and so much influence and they're so small? But one reason is, I believe at least, even though they're not believers, is they know what these principles in the Old Testament say, and they practice that to some degree, which keeps stuff within their family networks to some degree. And they're not the only ones who do it. I've noticed that Chinese people do that in Australia. I've noticed that Indian people do that in Australia. One thing that we're observing in the housing market right now, which I think the government should put an end to, they let so many foreigners come here and buy homes. It's making it hard for Australians. But I got to give credit. I don't actually blame the foreigners for what they're doing. They're just taking advantage of a good situation. I get what they're doing. But what they'll do is they'll come here and like 3 or 4 families will buy a house on a street. And then they'll save up, and then they'll buy 2 or 3 more houses on the street. And the combined economic input of all those families goes towards buying all those houses until over time, they each own their own home. I've seen that being done by multiple different minority communities in Australia. So in other words, there are peoples who get this. They get this and they apply it. But for some reason, the Western cultures, the European cultures have been trained to forget it. And we need to remember it. And what I find amazing is that we have all these principles in the Bible, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, and people have just forgotten this.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why you see, the Antichrist spirit, which is, harmonizing within the globalist / Islamist / all the isms, feminism, and all of this. Its prime target is the biblical worldview. So whether that's coming through Christian or Jewish people, because it's that biblical worldview that they want to annihilate and get rid of, because that's the thing that brings the blessings. That's the thing that, keeps families strong. If they can atomize us and get us to forget all of these wisdoms and truths, these things that keep the grace, that keeps God's grace upon us, essentially, we're sort of like, if we lose that history, then we go into oblivion. So, that's not going to happen because God won't let that happen ultimately, but that's certainly the goal that they aspire to, is to try to get rid of God out of our public square and certainly our legal system as well.
So I think there's an important point to make here too. When we have the difference between the American system, which it appears the evidence indicates that this is what the Trump administration is attempting to return to. One of the pieces of evidence, another piece of evidence for that is at Davos back in January. Well, Marco Rubio in February at the Munich Security Conference said we're not going to be these glad escorts. I always mess it up, but we're not going to continue in this managed decline of our own nation. We're just not going to. Things like that come out. But then also at Davos back in January, Jameson Greer, who is his official title is he's an ambassador of sorts, but he is an economic advisor. He gave an address at what's it called, the America House or something over there in Davos, a new place they set up where they have their own talks and lectures. He gave a presentation about the American system, Hamiltonian system.
Yeah, he starts out. He started out with a speech that said on December 5th, 1791, Alexander Hamilton presented his reports on manufactures, outlining a strategy to free the United States from economic dependence on the British Empire. He argued that tariffs and targeted subsidies were necessary to protect and grow domestic industries, allowing America to industrialize, achieve self-sufficiency, and eventually compete globally. This framework became the foundation for America's rise as a leading industrial and economic power in the 19th and 20th centuries. So,
Yeah, it made it an incredible power.
yeah.
And
So
yeah,
that was a speech by Jameson Greer at Davos.
Yeah. Matthew, you said, both of you, what you've just said here in the past few minutes, I think is a very important concept that we should probably underline here because it goes right along with your chapter in Like a Roaring Lion. Let's get this up here again. Could find my graphic. Yeah, guys, you need to take a look at this book. You got to get a copy. You can also get it on Kindle. We have several copies. We have it on Kindle. We have it all over the place. This is great. So the concept that we wanted to mention here is, you said that this economic system, the imperial system, the liberal international order, you follow its philosophical roots back to British liberal philosophy, and I think this is probably something that you've probably studied with focus on the Enlightenment. Is there is a line of philosophy running through British liberal philosophy, that starts off with, it ends up in utilitarianism, and basically
John Stuart Mill. Yeah,
and so what it basically does is that it establishes that mankind is a beast to be managed. The American system, there was an important point. Which article was that, Summer? So I can share that, the 400-page Logan's book. I'll just
Okay.
share that right quick because I think this.
I just have to look.
So basically, there were two systems at odds in America at the founding, and that was, is it going to be the utilitarian system? Is it going to be based on British liberal philosophy or something else? So there was a moment where, I know you may, in the Declaration, where we get to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As I had a libertarian mind growing up, and I always heard, read, and believed that, that something's wrong there because they took property out and they put happiness in its place. What we find out from this book, there's the fundamental difference was Leibniz, who had a more Christian-like worldview. He affirming that there is an eternal law, natural law. He's affirming that there is a lawgiver. Where rights come from, who is supreme over governments, versus the Lockean tradition, which would be man is a beast to be managed, along that line of philosophy. So there's something that happened there when you're coming up with the language for the Declaration. At first it was life, liberty, and the pursuit of property or private property. And when it was Ben Franklin, as a result of the influence of Leibniz earlier through Logan, right? Is it James Logan?
James Logan.
Who has a 400-page book, right? That was just sort of hidden out of history. It's been very difficult to find, but
It was rediscovered in 1969.
okay. So and what it was saying was, it was founded in this world, this more Christian worldview, the theistic worldview. What happened was, it was actually Ben Franklin too. We've heard a lot of weird things about Franklin, but it was Franklin who suggested, no, let's take this idea of property out and put happiness in. And I always thought, well, look at that. That's going to hurt us. Doesn't that feel like communism or socialism? But it wasn't the case. Franklin had been influenced by Logan and this Leibnizian perspective of the theistic worldview. We're not denying property. We want to have, our pursuit should be life, liberty, and happiness, which in their sense means virtue, pursuit of virtue, which is, in our worldview, leads to happiness, of course. So we need a higher concept there than just property. How do we dispense of our property once we have it? We need to be virtuous. This is a really interesting thing that I've really had to change my thinking on recently about what that particular change meant.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
it just shows that it just shows some of the early traces where you can see there was an ideological subversion. So the idea of that is that this manuscript has been obscured such that people would not even understand accurately what the Declaration of Independence was actually trying to say and communicate. So in other words, it's kind of like, the lost Dead Sea Scrolls or something of how to interpret the founding of our nation. So it's one of the early indicators, the fact that it's still being suppressed in a lot of ways. Like, I think there's a copy of a copy at Guilford College about 93 miles away from us, but there are not so many copies of this manuscript, and I believe the original one is in Philadelphia right now. But it's like I don't even think you can check it out. You can come in and you can look at it, but it's been very obscured and of course demonized and all of this. But if you want to find it, Brad, to just bring a face to it all, it's located at the bottom of the article. Not Iraq 2.0 plus Trump isn't Israel's chump.
Okay.
If you go all the way to the bottom, almost, you'll see.
Okay.
Where, yeah.
Yeah, I'll pull this up on the screen for folks as we're going. So, Matthew, it's really this idea that there's a fundamental worldview battle going on all the time.
Right.
And I need to ask you, too, while we're here at this point.
It's really like the devil's way or God's way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it's, you know what I mean? Like, it's really quite...
Even by God's common grace, his providence, there are certain actions that can be blessed and certain just some that can't.
Yeah, you just scroll almost down to the end.
Well, let me ask Matthew, how are you doing on time right now? Because we got started a few minutes late because we were so I was giddy to talk to you. So how long do you have left?
Maybe for another 15, 20 minutes, and then I'll probably need to finish up. But
I got it marked. Okay. So as I'll look for this that Summer has, I'll pull it up on here. But where should we go next? In your chapter on free trade in Like a Roaring Lion.
Well, we could we could look at what it talks about in the New Testament. So a lot of people are like, well, okay, Matt, but we're Christians. We don't live by the Old Testament. We live by the New Testament. But the New Testament also puts a lot of boundaries around how we use our wealth. I mean, I was heavily influenced by libertarian philosophy at one point, only for quite a short period. And I mean, I did a lot of reading on Lockean philosophy. I mean, America and Australia both have Lockean systems. They've got different emphasis, but they both draw their systems from that Lockean sort of Hobbesian political philosophy. The idea of a social contract, the idea of, the equality of man in nature, and all of that sort of stuff. In fact, that line that you're talking about from the Declaration of Independence actually comes from a paraphrase from something Locke wrote in his 2 treatises on government. So one of his political philosophies. I think I might have mentioned that in Defending Conscience. I can't remember. But anyway, my point is, this is an ancient battle, and the Bible gives us wisdom about how to fight this battle. why do we listen to secular economic systems rather than God's insights into how to fight the battle? To me, as a Christian, it just seems remarkable how Christians have been trained not to think about these things biblically. In fact, I'm actually planning to have a discussion with someone about this. A guy I know, a really good guy, because he just asked me some questions about this the other day. We're going to talk. I actually sent him the book so he could read the chapter so we could talk about it. And just because I outline this in the chapter doesn't mean I might have understood everything perfectly. But what we're trying to do in this chapter, what I'm trying to do in this chapter, is show people that the devil really is trying to harm nations. If you look at the book of Revelation, right, at the end of the book of Revelation, the nations are there. Just before that, the devil is defeated, cast into the lake of fire, the eternal punishment. But before that happens, before he is cast in there, his design is in every way he can to damage the nations as much as possible. He wants to harm them, because to harm them means that he can get as many people to go down with him as possible. That is his plan. And so a good example is this. I've got this page 201, command the rich. Paul says this in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17 to 19. As for the rich in the present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. And so, as Christians, I don't know what your perspective is on this, but I don't believe the New Testament teaches that Christians are supposed to tithe. I believe the New Testament teaches that Christians should give generously to their church out of their.
The Lord loves a cheerful giver.
Yeah, exactly right. Lord loves a cheerful giver. So in the Old Testament, their tithing system was structured around their national identity, and their tithe was basically the equivalent of an income tax. And then there was free will offerings on top of that. In the New Testament, it's a free will offering system, you could say, based on that Old Testament concept of giving what you want of your heart's desire. So that does not mean the New Testament does not put boundaries around how we use our wealth. Jesus gives the parable of the shrewd manager. It says, use your money to buy friends in heaven, which is a remarkable parable, The parable of the talents. I just preached on that on the weekend because I was in Matthew 25. He gives us everything we give so we can invest and make a return on it. And he wants us to use what he gives us to build up our rewards in heaven. 1 Timothy chapter 6 is what Paul is talking about. He was saying, you rich people, God has given it to you. Enjoy it. Be thankful. It's not a sin to be rich. But make sure you use that wealth within the boundaries that God has called you to. God gives abundantly, that you may give abundantly. And so make sure also you don't put your hope in it. We all know rich people who have lost everything. Even riches in this life is not firm. So the thing I would just note is, if you're going to read the Bible and see what it tells us about economics, just recognize the basic principle is boundaries. Good boundaries, using your money in a wise way, not to just benefit yourself, but to benefit your family. The Bible says that a man who does not provide is worse than an unbeliever. This is also from 1 Timothy 5 verse 8. It's just the next section of the book. Men must provide. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So we need to think of our wealth in the context of how we stewarding it today so that we can look after our families if necessary. Maybe your mum might need to live with you when she's an older lady. Maybe your dad. Maybe your brother and his wife are going to go through a hard time and you're going to need to look after them for a while. Maybe you're going to be in a hard spot. And so if we're breaking apart all family networks and we're just using our wealth selfishly, what's that going to cause? It's going to cause a fractured society, which is exactly what we live in. So there's this communal aspect of our wealth, which the New Testament also talks about. It is not communism. Communism is everyone owns nothing. Everything is basically communal goods. We're not talking about that. The New Testament never teaches that. And in fact, many people, we need to address this, coming back to the communism thing, because we said it at the start. Some people like to argue that Jesus was a communist, but that is not correct. Karl Marx explicitly contradicts Jesus, and I'll show you how. Jesus says in the parable of the talents that he has given to each according to his ability. And then what does he say? Use that to make as much rewards for yourself as possible. Karl Marx said, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. In other words, Karl Marx says, no matter how much you make, we're going to give you the same amount at the end of the day. That is actually the opposite, the very opposite of what Jesus teaches. So people who like to say, well, this sounds like communism. No. We're not talking anything like communism. In fact, you could call it familyism, or some people, I don't, and I won't use that word because that means something else. People use it in a different context, but we're talking about a system which prioritizes those family relationships, and the broader family relationship is the nation. That money is being used in a way which benefits not yourself, but benefits your kin, benefits your social network, your community network. This is how, a good example of this in the American system, and I know most of your viewers would be American, so but you guys might even know more about this than I do. But I know from like early 20th century American history, that one of the ways that small towns or some cities, like city communities, would look after each other is there would be these health co-ops where all of the productive people in the society would pay into this co-op. And then when somebody got sick, there was money within that co-op to pay for that person's health. Now, that's a very wise system. It's not the same as an insurance system, but it's a wise system for two reasons. One, if everybody's invested in it, then everybody has an ownership in it and a responsibility to look after their own health. But there's also that community aspect. When somebody's struggling, they're not just out on their own going bankrupt because they don't have the money to pay for their healthcare. There's a community pool to draw within. So I'm just showing these kinds of community systems have been done even in recent times in our own nations in ways which are incredibly wise, which help people. Another cool example I saw of this was this church in America. I can't even remember the name of the church, but they did this funding drive where they actually paid off every single person's debt in the church. I can't remember even how big the church was, but the people in the church gave to that church, and the members of the church, they managed to get each other out of debt. Like, isn't that just an amazing picture of what Jesus Christ has done for us? When Jesus proclaims the year of the Lord's favor, he's actually looking back to the debt jubilee system, which was set up in the ancient days for Israel, and applying that in a spiritual way to our sins. So I just think from a spiritual perspective, you've got to recognize the New Testament talks about some of this stuff as well. And the basic concept is boundaries, love for one another, and not being selfish.
Amen.
I think there are a couple themes that I drew out of your chapter 8 and Like a Roaring Lion. Major spiritual concepts that are definitely implied there, and some of them mentioned directly. Idolatry, how wealth, possessions can certainly be idols to us. These are, jump up here, there we go. Those are kind of the obvious idols, but it's the hidden idols that I think are most deadly. I read a book called Gospel Treason over the last year, which deals with how to find idols in yourself, and I was shocked at how many I have, that I'm still trying to kill, to defeat. It's those hidden idols that are most deadly. Things like expectations. Things should be this way, and when they're not, I'm gonna be upset about it. Self-sufficiency, stewardship is definitely, it comes out of this chapter. And I wanted to mention, because you brought it up there, parable of the talents is something that I find fascinating too, because for what it actually means, particularly when you see the two servants who have invested it and brought a gain on it. These are God's good gifts to us, and we're instructed to steward them well. And the third servant was not just rebuked, but it seems, cast into outer darkness. It seems like this one was never with us to begin with. Do you think I'm reading into the text with that conclusion, or what do you think about the way Jesus described the third servant there.
No, I think you're right. You're absolutely right.
Okay,
Actually, I might have put this on Substack the other day. I think I put up a little comment about this, but a lot of people don't realize that because they think of when given the talent. A lot of people think I'm just like the guy with one talent. I don't have much talent. I don't have much to offer. But a talent was worth 6,000 denarius, and a denarius was a day's wage. So a talent is worth 6,000 days worth of labor. Now, if you just count days in a year, that's 16.4 years. If you count if you count weekends, 5-day work week, that ends up being about 23 years worth of income. In other words, the point of that parable is that God generously gives, and then he says, now you make rewards for yourself out of my bank account. And then when you've stewarded that, I'm going to give you even more than you can ever imagine. But the parable that the third servant saw God as a harsh taskmaster and was fearful and therefore hid it and actually didn't steward what he was given and then is judged. It actually says, cast that servant into outer darkness where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth, which is actually a line which is repeated a couple of times in that context, and it leads up to the judgment in Matthew 25 at the end there with the eternal suffering. Yeah.
That's severe. That's a really important point there. This is also, we use this to as liberty as a good gift of God to be stewarded, and we need to defend it, protect it, and well, instead of getting into that, we think there are at least three duties that a Christian has that come out of the text. There's the greatest commandment, to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. When you live by these principles, that's a way to love your neighbor. Engage with the political system to keep terrible policies from becoming law is another way to love your neighbor. But there's the creation mandate, take dominion, rule over the earth, mine the resources, be builders of it. You see the globalist system now, that we've been identifying here tonight, is just the opposite at the moment anyway. They're about the opposite. Let's stop producing. They want you to feel ashamed of your prosperity. And then there's the Great Commission, of course, which is, go therefore, let's teach everyone that we can encounter with all that Jesus commanded and make disciples. So I guess we're right here at the end of the time. And so I want to, Summer, is there anything you want to set Matthew up with for this? You good?
No, I'm good.
Matthew, please let us know what you want us to take from this chapter or the whole book, and the floor is yours to leave our viewers with what message you'd like for them to hear.
Well, just remember the love of money is a root, not the root, but a root of all evil. And so what I would like people to recognize is that there is a global war for your soul going on, but also for your prosperity, for your good, for your health. And the devil is seeking to destroy nations in every way he can. And one of the ways which he uses is the love of money and the deception of money. And so there's an individual application for us all to steward our money in a way which honors God, honors our family, invests in the next generation. But there's also a recognition that many of the things both the left and the right have been taught about economics is actually, as orthodoxy, is actually deceptions which are designed to destroy us from different directions. Communism destroys nations. Communism is foolish. Communism is evil. Communism it destroys nations. But capitalism, when it's unrestrained, think about that. Capitalism means moneyism. And so we've been taught that the opposite of communism is moneyism. No. The opposite of both these systems is wise stewardship. And I would put it in the context of Ecclesiastes. There's a time to trade freely and there's a time to hold back. And we've lost that principle of wisdom in the West because we've been locked into this false dichotomy of these two competitive ideological frameworks. But we need to look outside the ideological frameworks and recognize that the devil is clever, and he's been able to bring down nations, going back into the ancient world using the same strategies. And therefore, if you're aware of this, you can actually start to look at things from a new perspective and recognize there are ways which the devil's damages can be limited, both at a national level and at an individual level. Most of us only have power over the individual level and in the context of our own lives and our own families. But even then, we can have a little bit more influence than we think, because we can have influence in our church network, in our street where we live, with the people that are around us. But if there's anybody listening to this who is looking at this from who is in politics, who is in a position of influence, recognize that there are different policies which you can do, which will make your nation flourish or which will destroy it. And you might be surprised that some of the things you thought were good for your nation are actually really a drug which is going to undermine it. So that's kind of what I would summarize. I want people to take from that chapter.
Nice.
That's awesome. This has been really, really fun, and I think we may have to come back to this topic again. Hopefully, we're going to work through every chapter of this book together over time, which is a book that we really want people that engage with our work to have and to digest it, because there's plenty in there for you. The chapter on how the devil destroys through conspiracy is particularly important today. And every chapter is edifying. I find it edifying, and I've learned a lot through it. And Summer, I'm sure, feels the same way.
Yep.
So, folks, look this up and get yourself a copy of this. Matthew, thank you for being with us again. It's been a lot of fun, and I look forward to getting with you again here as soon as we can, whenever we can, and we'll see where we go next. Maybe you could just tell us where you'd like to go, and we'll talk about that.
No, I appreciate being on here, guys. I really enjoyed both your perspectives and your thoughtfulness. And I really loved the discussion. It's been really fun.
Yeah.
It's awesome. It's great.
Anything you want to say on the way out?
All glory to God.
Amen to that. All right, Matthew, thank you for being with us. And folks, we'll see you again here very soon, Lord willing.
God bless you. Good night.
As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart, and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. The average American, they say, soft and decadent. He'll become paralyzed with fear and panic. He'll run away and hide, and do nothing to interfere as they strike at the community's power centers. Any all-out revolution must create a state of crisis wherein almost all of the male population would be forced to remain in their homes because of its affluence. It has waxed soft. The motive force behind its life drive is its endless pursuit of prestige, conspicuous consumption, and sensual pleasure. After the stage is properly set, America could be brought to her knees in 90 days. Ladies and gentlemen, the organization behind these preparations has almost unlimited financial resources. Our enemies are deadly serious about their task, and it's nothing short of national suicide for us to continue to ignore their plans and their progress. The strategy calls for the quiet conversion of our government. They have one and only one solution for all problems: more government, and then more and more until it's total government. In 1943, the following directive was issued from party headquarters. It read, "When certain obstructionists become too irritating, label them after suitable build-ups as fascist. Label them as fascist or Nazi or anti-Semitic, and use the prestige of anti-fascist and tolerance organizations to discredit them. In the public mind, constantly associate those who oppose us with those names which already have a bad smell. The association will, after enough repetition, become fact in the public mind."